What if the only people who truly saw you were strangers, and everyone who knew your name only saw the worst? That question hit David Walker harder than any headline, any courtroom accusation, or any night spent staring at the ceiling in a penthouse suite that now felt like a prison cell. Once a celebrated CEO of Walker Tech, he had everything: power, wealth, prestige, and then in a matter of weeks he had nothing. His reputation had been shredded by scandal. His daughter had been taken from him. His company teetered on collapse. But none of it hurt quite like the silence, the kind that wraps around your chest when you realize you have no one left to call, and no one who wants to pick up if you do. That's why he sat alone on a cold bench in Central Park, ready to disappear. That's when a little girl with a messy braid and wildflowers in her hand looked up at him and asked something so simple it nearly broke him. "Would you like to meet my mom?" He had no idea that question would change everything. Stay with us, because what happens next will shake everything you believe about love, loss, and second chances. The cold November air wrapped around David Walker like a shroud. He sat motionless on a weather-worn bench in Central Park, the gray sky pressing down on him like the weight of everything he had lost. Just 3 months ago, he was the golden boy of Wall Street, as CEO of Walker Tech Industries, a $2 billion empire. Married to Rachel Evans, the kind of woman who turned heads at every gala. Father to Lily, his vibrant, blue-eyed 9-year-old, who used to call him Daddy Lightning because of how fast he was at chasing her in the yard. Now the headlines screamed fraud. His face was plastered on the covers of financial magazines with headlines like "The Fall of a Titan." His ex-wife had taken full custody of Lily. His company was spiraling under investigation. He hadn't eaten all day, hadn't slept the night before. His phone buzzed relentlessly in his coat pocket, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. No lawyer, no investor, no PR expert could undo the hollow he felt in his chest. And for the first time in his life, David Walker wondered, what would it feel like to simply disappear? As he stared into the reflection of the lake hands, trembling eyes vacant, a small voice broke through the fog. "You look sad, mister. Do your eyes hurt when you cry too?" He blinked. A little girl stood beside him, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a faded beige dress with slightly scuffed sneakers. Her hair was long and chestnut brown, slightly messy from the wind. In one hand, she clutched a small bunch of wildflowers, slightly wilted, but arranged with care. There was something surreal about her, like she'd stepped out of a dream he didn't know he had. "I'm sorry," David murmured, startled. "Did you say something?" She nodded with the wisdom of someone much older. "My mom says that when your heart hurts, your eyes do too. Would you like to meet her? She always knows what to say." David was too stunned to respond at first. He looked around. There were families passing by, joggers, tourists snapping photos of the last golden leaves. No one else noticed this quiet moment. He forced a weak smile. "You talk to strangers a lot." The girl nodded proudly. "Only the ones who look like they forgot how to smile." Before he could react, she waved her little bouquet toward a woman walking toward them. Claire Dawson, her mother, wore a camel-colored coat that had clearly seen better seasons, and a floral skirt that danced softly in the wind. She had that kind of beauty you didn't notice right away, but once you did, it was hard to forget. Her hands held a bouquet of fresh chrysanthemums, and her eyes locked with David's, like she could see right through the corporate armor he no longer wore. "I hope Emily's not bothering you," Claire said with a gentle tone. "Not at all," David stood instinctively, brushing off invisible dust. "She's actually the most honest conversation I've had in weeks." Claire smiled, and something in that expression stirred something buried in David. Not pity, not curiosity, something simpler, warmer, human. Emily tugged at his coat. "We're having lunch, homemade sandwiches. Do you want to join us? There's soup too. Mom made it." David hesitated. In his world, lunch meant tasting menus at Michelin-starred restaurants, discussing mergers over caviar. But when Claire opened her tote and pulled out a thermos and wax-wrapped sandwiches, the smell of roasted tomatoes and fresh sourdough overwhelmed him. "Why not?" he whispered almost to himself, and sat down again. They laid out their simple meal on the bench. Claire poured steaming soup into colorful ceramic mugs. Emily offered him one proudly. "Try it. It makes you warm inside." David took a sip. It was delicious. Claire asked kindly, "And what do you do, Mr.?" He froze. He could say finance, the generic answer, or lie, or tell the truth and watch the warmth in her face melt into suspicion. He'd seen it too many times, people recalibrating their tone the moment they recognized the name. Just business, he said quickly. And you, I'm a florist, Claire said. I own a little shop on the edge of Brooklyn. Flower and vine. Not much, but enough to raise Emily and do what I love. David watched Emily run after a pigeon, laughing with delight, and for a split second saw Lily in her. His throat tightened. Do you have kids? Claire asked gently, noticing his sudden silence. One, David said. Lily. She's 9. But I don't get to see her much anymore. Claire didn't ask for more. She simply placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and said, Kids forgive more than we think. Don't give up. The words sliced through him. Then, as if the universe knew he needed just a bit more light, Emily returned, holding something small and bound with a red ribbon. This is for you, she said, shy now. It's our happy book. Me and Mommy write down something good every night before bed. Maybe it'll help you find something happy too. David opened the notebook. On the first page, scrawled in messy block letters, it read, Today the wind was loud, but we found peace in our soup. Next to it was a drawing of a bowl and 2 stick figures smiling. He couldn't stop the tears this time. He tried to hide them behind a half laugh, but Claire saw and said nothing. She simply handed him a napkin. This wasn't a business meeting. It wasn't networking. It was something more dangerous and precious. It was real. As the afternoon light dimmed, David felt something shift. He didn't know it yet, but that moment on a worn-out bench in Central Park with 2 strangers would change his life forever. We're truly sorry to pause the story here, just when things are starting to shift for David. But let me ask you this. Do you believe that sometimes the smallest gestures from strangers can heal the biggest wounds? If this moment touched your heart, please like this video and drop a heart in the comments. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. It started with sandwiches and silence. Then it became routine. For 2 weeks, David Walker returned to that same bench in Central Park, always at the same hour, always hoping, not assuming that Claire and Emily would be there. And somehow they always were. Claire never asked why a man in a tailored coat and expensive shoes kept showing up alone with dark circles under his eyes. She never asked about the phone calls he ignored or why he sometimes flinched when kids ran past him laughing. Instead, she offered him coffee from a dented thermos, a smile that wasn't for show, and stories about her tiny flower shop in Brooklyn. Emily brought drawings and silly jokes and the kind of laughter that peeled back the layers of exhaustion in his chest. David told himself it was harmless, a break from the storm. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. He had begun to need them. One evening, after a particularly brutal phone call with his lawyer, the kind where every word sounds like a ticking clock on your life, David arrived at the park late. He found Claire sitting alone on the bench, the sky dimming the air crisp. No Emily, he asked, trying to sound casual. She's playing with a friend nearby, Claire replied. I told her I needed 10 minutes alone. She smiled slightly, but there was something more serious behind it. I wanted to ask you something. David's pulse jumped. Claire leaned forward. Why do you come here, David? Don't get me wrong, I love your company. Emily adores you. But you're always carrying something heavy with you. You sit like you're bracing for an earthquake that never ends. David stared at the grass. He could lie. He had practiced lies for a living. But sitting next to Claire under the fading orange sky, lies felt too loud. I'm not who you think I am, he said, voice low. Claire didn't move, didn't flinch, just listened. I'm David Walker, CEO of Walker Tech. Or, I was. You've probably seen the headlines. Fraud, embezzlement, divorce. I'm the man Wall Street's tearing apart right now. The man who lost his daughter, his company, his name. Silence settled between them like fog. I thought if you knew, David continued, you'd look at me differently. Treat me like everyone else does now. Like I'm broken. Like I'm dangerous to stand next to. Claire was quiet for a moment, then chuckled softly. David, I knew who you were the first day we met. He froze. I recognized your face, she said. Your story's been everywhere. But the man who played with my daughter, who cried over a drawing in a notebook, that's not the man I read about. I wanted to meet you, not the scandal. David stared at her, stunned. Why didn't you say anything? Because everyone else is chasing headlines. I was chasing the truth. Something cracked open inside him. He felt unsteady, like the ground beneath him was shifting. But it wasn't fear, it was relief. Claire stood and stretched her arms out toward the sky. "Come on," she said. "Walk with me." They wandered through the dusky park. The world around them grew quieter, more intimate. David hadn't felt this free in months. Then Claire said something that stopped him cold. "When Emily was 3, her father left us." David turned to her, surprised. He said he wasn't ready for the responsibility, that he needed to find himself. Claire's voice was calm, but her hands twisted the strap of her bag. "For months I thought I'd done something wrong, that maybe I wasn't enough. But then Emily started asking, 'Why are you always sad?' And I realized I didn't want to be anymore. I wanted to show her what strength looked like." David swallowed hard. "And did you?" Claire smiled. "Some days better than others." She paused, then looked at him with quiet intensity. "We don't choose when people walk into our lives, David, but we can choose whether we push them away." A long breath escaped his lungs. Back at the bench, Emily returned with flushed cheeks and a flower in her hand. "This is for you," she said, offering a tiny yellow dandelion. "Because you looked extra sad today." David took the flower like it was made of gold. "Thank you, Emily. It's perfect." As the sun dipped below the skyline, Claire invited David to dinner at her apartment above Flower and Vine, the little flower shop she ran in Brooklyn. He hesitated. The thought of stepping into someone else's real life again, their home, their warmth, it felt too intimate, too risky. But when Emily grabbed his hand and said, "You can sit next to me at the table," he didn't say no. That night, the apartment glowed with low lights and the smell of homemade paella. The place was small, cluttered with flowers and mismatched furniture, but it felt more alive than any penthouse he'd ever owned. As they sat around the table, Emily eventually dozed off on the couch with a coloring book in her lap. Claire poured them both coffee in mugs that didn't match. "I have to confess something," David said, pushing the mug between his palms. "Tonight, I didn't feel like the man who's losing everything." Claire leaned her chin into her hand. "And who did you feel like? Someone who's just beginning?" She smiled and reached for the notebook Emily had left on the table. "Then maybe it's time you start your own happy book." David chuckled. Page 1. "I had dinner with the 2 people who reminded me what home feels like." Claire's eyes softened. "David." He looked at her, the words heavy in his chest. But before he could speak, a loud vibration buzzed from his coat. He pulled out his phone. The screen showed an alert from his lawyer. New charges filed. Additional press coverage incoming. His hands went cold. His breath shortened. He felt the shadows creeping back in. Claire stood. "You're not alone," she said gently. "Not anymore." David nodded, but the pit in his stomach was already opening again. He had found something good, but now he risked losing it. And this time it wasn't about stocks or power. It was about 2 people who saw the real him, and the choice of whether he could protect that or destroy it again. We're sorry to pause the story right here, just when David is beginning to open his heart. But now let us ask you this. If you were David, would you risk telling the full truth to protect something real, or walk away to keep them safe from your past? If this part touched you, please hit that heart and give this video a like. Your support helps bring stories like this to life. For a moment, David Walker sat frozen on the couch in Claire's apartment, clutching his phone like it was a live wire. The alert still glared on the screen, new charges, more media frenzy headlines sharpening their knives. But then he looked up. Across the room, Emily was curled under a blanket, fast asleep, a crayon still tucked behind her ear. Claire stood by the kitchen sink, drying a mug, her expression calm, grounded as if chaos had no invitation here. That image, warmth, peace, normalcy, stirred something primal in David. He had spent years building a life of high towers and glass walls, only to find comfort now in chipped mugs and borrowed blankets. And he knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't going to run anymore. The next morning, David made a call he'd been dreading. He met his legal team in Midtown and gave them full permission to open every document, every transaction, every ledger. "No more playing defense," he told them. "I want the truth out, whatever it is, and I want to know who did this." By week's end, the stress had multiplied, but so had his resolve. He returned to Claire and Emily every evening, like it was the only place he could breathe. Then one night, Emily said something that changed everything. They were watching the evening news. A photo of Brian Carter Walker Tech's COO and David's longtime right-hand man appeared on screen. The anchor mentioned him in connection to the case. "That's the man who came into Mom's flower shop last week," Emily said casually, chewing a grape. "He asked weird questions about you." Claire and David locked eyes. "What kind of questions?" David asked slowly. Emily shrugged. "Like if you were really in love with Mommy, and if you give up your company for her." David felt a chill run through him. He left the apartment that night with a new kind of fire burning inside him. The next day he walked straight into Walker Tech's headquarters and called Brian into his office. "You've got one chance," David said, eyes steady. "Tell me what you've done." Brian didn't even deny it. His voice was cold, calm, rehearsed. "You were soft, David. Getting sentimental, playing house with a florist and a kid while your empire was ripe for the taking. I did what had to be done." David said nothing. He didn't rage. He didn't threaten. He just pressed a button and let the hidden security camera stream everything lived to his attorneys on the line. By the end of the week, Brian Carter was arrested on charges of fraud, corporate sabotage, and attempted embezzlement. The press coverage turned. Public opinion shifted, but David barely paid attention. He was already walking away from the chaos, from the headlines, straight back to the life he truly wanted. 6 months later, the spring sun warmed the hills of Hudson Valley, where a modest garden wedding was taking place. Claire wore a simple ivory dress, her hair pinned with tiny white blossoms. Emily twirled in pink throwing petals in the air and squealing with joy. David stood beneath an arbor Claire had decorated herself, holding her hands, his daughter Lily standing proudly beside him. He had fought to regain shared custody, and now Lily spent weekends with him, often giggling with Emily, like they'd been sisters forever. After the ceremony, they gathered in a sunlit backyard with friends, neighbors, and a few loyal colleagues. There was no press, no grandeur, just laughter, good food, and something sacred in the air. Later that night, David and Claire danced barefoot under fairy lights, while Emily and Lily chased fireflies nearby. "You know," Claire whispered, "for a man who once ruled half of Manhattan, you look pretty content in a garden." David kissed her forehead. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm not building towers, I'm growing roots." She smiled. "That sounds like something we should write in the happy book." He nodded. "Page 1 of our new chapter." Just then, Lily ran up, holding a drawing she and Emily had worked on. It showed a house, a garden, and 4 stick figures smiling hand in hand. Above it, scrawled in crayon, "This is what love looks like." David stared at it for a long time, overwhelmed. This wasn't what he had planned for his life. It was better. Because in losing everything, he had found what mattered most. He had found home. We truly hope this story brought something warm to your heart. But before we go, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment when life forced you to slow down, only to lead you to something more meaningful? Do you believe that even after great loss, love has the power to rebuild us? What do you think of this story? Comment number 3 if it touched your heart, number 1 if it didn't feel right, or number 2 if you thought it was just okay. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? If this story gave you hope, please leave a heart in the comments, and don't forget to share this video with someone who might need it.